Hello! You know who it is. As 2024 winds down, I thought it would be pretty good to do a year-end wrap-up. This is going to be a nice short one, finishing up a lot of small things before getting cracking on 2025. First off, as you probably already know, my new VN Volt on the Electromagnetic Planet is out. This one has been a long time coming, and I'm already writing the rough draft of the script for episode 2. But that won't go into production until late next year. Having said that, I do wish the sales were a bit higher. I worked very hard to get this one together, and I would love if more people just gave it a shot. I'm not even asking for universal love or praise, just a bit of attention. I know the price is not nothing. I did try to hit something which, kind of felt fair to the amount of time and effort I put in. But in the interest of maybe driving some more sales, I may do a New Year sale discount for perhaps a week or two. Being fair to the patrons, I'm not going to drop it down to the Patreon-only price, but maybe something a little more reasonable that people can justify as a purchase. It seems like it doesn't matter who you are, the transition from YouTube to personal work is always a hard one, and people take a lot of convincing to give personal projects a real shot. So if you haven't given it consideration, or were too busy over the holidays, please consider giving it a read. At the very least, the music is kick-ass. With that, we move on to the next thing, namely, Gundam Requiem for Vengeance. This isn't going to be a super in-depth review, just initial impressions and kind of my first thoughts. Generally speaking, I had pretty low expectations going into it. Gundam is a weird thing where even the Japanese creators, who, originally made it, could also make something like Igloo, a weird, very janky, but sort of unique CG entry that mostly does a lot of what most side story stuff does. Pad the fuck out of the 1 Year War. For Gundam's largest conflict in scale, it isn't a strange one that, perhaps, in detail, people would want to add to with their own stories. In general, Igloo within that is kind of a weird prime example of how odd that can turn out. You do get lots of cool one-off mobile suits and mobile armors and, combat sequences, but the characters are mostly forgettable, the morality of the conflict was pretty laughably overdramatic, and so it perhaps isn't that weird that the post-World War II realist cinema aspect of Gundam is one of the least well carried over in later works. So, how does MSG Refovi stand up? It's pretty much par for the course. It is tremendously funny to see mechanical design as wacky and janky as that from 0079 be done in the most self-serious way possible. It carries on what Igloo did here in spades. I don't think Kunio Okawara making a goofy gloopy robot or jet called something like the, Bakugu in the late 70s could have predicted such a self-serious interpretation nigh on nearly 60 years later. In terms of its actual appeal, I find it funny in that kind of very Gundam lungfishy way, but also aesthetically do think it falls very much unsurprisingly into modern ArtStation art design approaches. CG means more details and more details and more details, and the appeal of something like the classic Okawara designs for me is their wacky but very sleek and simple nature. Here I think Origin's modernizations did wonders. The main thing which I think maybe consistently annoyed me is some of the particle effects and sound effects on weapons. This isn't to say I was expecting gritty, Blender authentic realism here, but the iconic Gundam sounds do add a lot to its personality. I get wanting to do something different, but I think I would have just preferred the classic sound palette. On the same kind of note, the very fancy and Blender smoke and particle explosions, I don't know, they're fine, they're very well rendered or whatever, but altogether these things kind of contribute to a very much like fan film feel for what is supposed to be an official project. I found the setting kinda neat. It is true that the 1 Year War is so massive, you do still have a lot of areas and stories that were hinted at but never directly told. As the tellings have taken place over the decades, our changing worldview has also influenced our interpretations. Europe is a neat pick there for sure. What I found, I think, more disappointing is that, like literally almost every Gundam 1 Year War side story, it still felt it needed to do, that is the thing you kind of expect it to do, add another Gundam in. Even the angle of the Zeon perspective, turning the Gundam into a kind of slasher, unstoppable movie villain, has been done in more than one way. From the dramatic counter of the Alex in War in the Pocket to the one that was really sticking out in my brain as I was watching this, Zeonic Front, which was almost, 20 years ago now? It may seem very odd to say, but I do wish more side stories had the confidence to step outside the inclusion of the titular machine. Igloo, for all its faults, did mostly do this. And Armor Hunter Mellowlink is explicitly fascinating for doing just as much with the Votom setting. Anyway, those are my kind of quick and rough thoughts, so moving on. Armored Core, secret level thing. Speaking of big Western productions applied to Japanese mecha things that I ended up kind of feeling meh to okayish about, we got Armored Core Asset Management, a short within the Secret Level series. Keanu Reeves is back in a grim cyberpunk world. Sloppy chop dock augmentation, drugs, weird bars. It's based on the hit video game Cyberpunk. Oh no, he's getting into a giant robot. Oh, okay, so maybe it actually, mostly is Armored Core. All in all, I can't say this one was bad. They clearly put a lot of effort in, but it also did very little for me. With something like, Gundam, you mostly watch it, and you don't really have that many interactive pieces of media, so games, that I think really capture the feel of its combat super well. But then, that's the thing. Armored Core isn't a visual medium thing. It's an interactive medium thing. Armored Core is a video game series. I've now played a heap of it, and I think I've done lots of cool stuff and stupid stuff and just generally fun stuff. Because of that, I like it quite a lot. So watching this was very much like watching some guys doing like a really good car commercial, but for a car you already own. With that, I think the things which stuck out to me the most are stuff which, are in the games or handled differently, and I don't feel it captured very well. First off, the soundtrack was some pretty generic, hardcore cyberpunk filler music schlop. When Armored Core has such a long history of weird and unique music in so many of its entries, thanks to the equally weird and interesting Koda Hoshino, the fact this one fell back on a pretty unmemorable OST only added to that kind of vibe for me of like, are you sure you're making an Armored Core short and not a cyberpunk game entry? The fact the ACs don't seem to vibrantly flare their thrusters when they move is also kind of annoying. Like they're there, they're firing, but many AC games, and very much 6 in particular, had a really good attention to detail with thrusters kind of firing in logical patterns and even doing that little cooling vent after they've been used. In the short, they were all there, but it just doesn't feel as kind of as well coordinated. Oh, and the cockpit sucked. Sorry, I know this probably took some hard surface modelers days or weeks of work to do, but that was probably the part I bought the least. After 3rd gen, in 4th, definitely 4th, 5th, and now in 6th, ACs remain very maneuverable in terms of their freedom of rapid dashes up, down, left, and right. With that in mind, I just don't buy this setup. Even in the short itself, given how much he throws the mech around, it just doesn't seem like he's very well secured. Like mentally, from 4th gen onwards, I just think the way that humans would be inside an AC is some kind of like fully strapped in, off-road, rally driver, just like really like fully delatized inside the fucking cockpit, because otherwise like you're just gonna get pasted against one of these walls as soon as you dash. And he did 2 kind of little buckles on his little ballistics plate, little combat vest, and that was it. So broadly, I don't know, it's not that bad. It's neat. I can't say, for me, it ranks any higher than one of the very well done intros for one of the AC games. But when I heard about this one, what I was really hoping for was something like the Animatrix's Last Flight of the Osiris, which was a CG short, but it felt like it was doing something kind of interesting or different with its world. But this kind of felt very visually played out in comparison. It's still neat. I'm not going to say it's a bad thing. It's fine. But returning to the metaphor, if AC6 alone, just AC6, was a car, I've already put in 13,000 kilometers on that baby. What I would really want is a DLC tune-up, rather than a commercial for a vehicle I already know and love. Project Wingman Frontline 59. Pivoting to another small neat thing, also related to AC, Project Wingman got the PC version of its once PlayStation exclusive Frontline 59 campaign. Set during the events of the larger conflict, but more specifically during a brief counter-invasion of the main antagonist faction from that game. On the improvement side, the interface, graphics, and general graphic design is looking tighter and better than ever. and the color space being limited down to a more condensed and readable variety did cut down on the eye-searingly oversaturated default that was Project Wingman. This is all good. When sleek visual design is a staple of the Ace Combat games, it's good to see the improvements coming through in this fan project. The vocal delivery on a lot of the voice lines also saw something of a noticeable improvement, which is also good. The writing can still fall a bit too hard into the cheese pit at times, but it's also broadly a bit better. In that way, Frontline 59 is very much more Project Wingman, but polished ever so slightly better. If you liked Project Wingman as is and want that, it ain't bad. The short 6-mission campaign is fun, but I do have a few points of criticism. Firstly and mainly is the tunnel mission. It's a big one. Like Ace Combat 3's Tunnel Vision, it's just one big tunnel run for most of it. However, unlike AC3, the tunnel has some of the worst tunnel run lighting imaginable. Is it dark? No, it's just all gray. Like, in order to get through this, I had to max out the gamma on my game to try and help. Tunnel Run in AC3 had pretty much constant, bright, vibrant textures and lighting to help players on its, Return of the Jedi plummet through the underground guts of a futuristic city run. Here in Project Wingman, though, I think some strong lighting would have helped a lot. If you want to stick with the half-built highway thing, some makeshift spotlights or construction lamps, I think would have been neat and it would have fit well. Instead, there's a kind of weird, one of those, in-game ambient glows that just seems to come from nowhere in specific and kind of emits from the fog. The challenge of these missions is always navigation, but I feel this one is just a case of kind of lack of contrast. This is very ironic considering how much the base game was perhaps deep-fried and way too much contrast. Beyond that, the final boss is pretty much like the final boss of the base game, one that sort of devolves into a mess after a point, pushing firmly into the shmup territory of Toho boss design. It is visually kind of just throwing up at you just over and over. So, don't blame me, but I defaulted to the classic giant Ace Combat bird killer, dumb launched giant bombs. Is it fun to UGB XL? Absolutely. Just as much fun as it was to do the Omegon in Ace Combat 6. If that was the goal, mission accomplished. But yeah, Frontline 59 is some neat side material to chew through if you already enjoyed base Project Wingman and just want a bit more of it, if perhaps a bit better. Gundam G Quas. I do feel like this one just blindsided everybody. I think I find the notion of this one extremely interesting, even if I'm not sure that I really like it just yet. On paper, you have a pretty stacked staff list. And no, here I don't actually mean directly Hideaki Anno. As Yamashita clarified on Twitter, Hideaki Anno is just running the studio. He's not writing all the scripts, he's maybe contributing a bit here and there. This isn't really Anno's Gundam, despite how much people would love to see it as that. It's really a lot of the other staff that caught my eye, being done by the Studio Kara group and kind of a larger group that have worked consistently within Gainax and on other pretty interesting projects for years. Beyond just the Eva rebuilds, they've now got Shin Goji, Shin Kamen Rider, and Shin Ultraman all under their belt. For example, Tsurumaki, who worked on various Gainax projects going all the way back to stuff like Nadia and Eva itself, is an interesting choice. The character designs coming from the same lady who did the Katanagatari designs, which I do enjoy a lot, but it's really friggin' Yoji and Okido's involvement which caught my attention. Now maybe you know an Okido, maybe you don't, but this friggin' guy has been involved in, I don't know, some of the neatest Gainax projects and anime works in the last 30 years. Not just Evangelion, but both Gunbuster and Diebuster, Fooly Cooly, the sort of interesting Captain Earth, but not really that much, and Star Driver, which stylistically I wished was a little better carried through. But those are really his lowest points. In general, Enokido was also, worth mentioning, one of the main writers for Revolutionary Girl Utena. So yeah, sorry to G-Witch. You had the lesbian love couple and the high school duels, but in the most ironic twist of fate, Gundam G Quas may be the actual Mobile Suit Gundam Revolutionary Utena suit girl thing. The setting also being some kind of weird alternate UC, I find very interesting as well. It's proximate enough that I think it's more than likely there's going to be some inevitable, UC fanfiction type stuff going on. And that right there, makes me really, really interested in what this is going to turn into. I don't know if I will like it. I don't even know if it'll be good, but it is very interesting. It's very different to see what the hell this thing is. After all, now, 30 years ago, when Mobile Fighter G Gundam was in the works, many people basically had the same criticisms. This is too weird to be a Gundam thing. Isn't this just pushing things too far? Or isn't this just trying to capture some modern trend? But with time, G Gundam did its own thing and was both pretty fun and unique for how it blended stuff together. Speaking of G Gundam and the setting for a moment, I also am not really convinced the entire series is going to be totally relegated to just Gundam duels. While it is true the proximity of the average Japanese person to war has grown pretty distant, I think the nature of the setting and Enokido's writing, his general history of writing, mean there's probably going to be some big twists in store. I wouldn't be surprised if more significant conflicts break out, and in really all meanings of that word. And for you folks who maybe thought, just maybe, that these character designs were so Pokemon, can they really kill people? Is it really going to get violent? You all need to watch Katanagatari. Because oh boy, it's the same designer, and that series has some friggin' wipeouts in it. You know, people quite literally getting wiped out. The last thing I want to touch on is Ikoto Yamashida's involvement as mechanical designer. Yamashida's work is very distinct and has evolved a lot over the last few decades. From his time during the original Evangelion stuff, Yamashita has changed pretty considerably. One thing I think I'm more critical of is that I feel his work became perhaps too fluidic in actual motion. I know this is going to sound very bizarre and perhaps over-conceptualized and abstract, so basically here's the thing. Yamashita shifted after Eva to do a lot of really, really nice illustration work. But that work, by design, was static. Illustrations, figures, these things don't actually move. So Yamashita's penchant for working moving lines into those things flowed well. Similar to something like hood ornament design, or perhaps futurist Italian statues, you can imply the dynamism of movement of life within the fixed, unmoving form of the figure. His work on Yukikaze really embodies this well. I don't think it's too controversial to say that jets don't tend to move their bodies like humans or mechs do. It's mostly relegated to their flaps or aerodynamic surfaces, or under extreme stress loads, the bending and compression of their general structure. But mechanical design isn't just unmoving things, right? Here, mechs need to have something of a costume-like design language. Things like joints and areas for a range of motion need to exist, like plates of armor. This, I think, is Yamashita's probably weakest point. His joints almost never feel to me as if they've been given any free range of motion. The design language of jets here isn't great because, obviously enough, most F-15s are not ger-walking around. This was really one of the strong points and perhaps one of the most impressive aspects of Kawamori's design, that in its aerodynamic form it perfectly evoked the jet fighters it needed to, and yet when it transformed, it could have a shape with some degree of motion for flexible humanoid posing and animation. I think the color space of the machine is also just a lot more cluttered as well. Red, yellow, blue, and so on are a lot more present all over than in the classic RX-78. So we return to the Jikuatsu designs, and we also see now kind of what I was meaning. There's just a lot going on, and even in not moving, there's a lot of lines flowing in and out of these shapes. Now on its own, this isn't really the issue. What the issue is you need to remember what studio is working on this. It's Studio Khara. Yeah, that one. The one which loves its incredibly dynamic CG camera angles and perspective shots. For me, when Yamashita goes all out in its details, in motion, in actual animation, they just sort of blur together. Like the first time I watched Yukikaze, I could not read the entirety of the details of those jet fighters. I needed to look up the mechanical designs independently, and even then, there's bits that move quite a good bit, and with the moving kind of surface textures, it can get all kind of blurred together. The human eye and human mind kind of has a reasonable RAM limit where it stops processing minutiae and just kind of glomps a shape into a larger blob. This is why motion tweens exist, and if you think about this from a purely anatomical perspective, when you're standing outside on a windy day, do you really actually perceive every single leaf on every single branch of every single tree? No, I didn't think so. So as a statue, I think these are cool, but I feel with the kind of animation treatment they will get, and we see a bit of in the trailers, it's going to dissolve into an ADHD color-shaped blob and not really be readable in detail. It's what ended up happening with the Rebuild movie's later Eva designs quite a bit. But I don't want to sound too negative here. Like I said, in general, I'm very interested in what this project will turn out to be. So I'll wrap up my first impressions with some cool details I did like. Firstly, the rear backpack thrusters being these rotating assembly is neat. It really leans into the idea of the Minovsky reactor's direct fusion stream being channeled out the thrusters of the suit to produce, well, thrust. I think the design probably took inspiration from the real-life F-35B VTOL in terms of how it can adjust its thruster output. These are basically a series of angled spheres which are kind of cut out and then layered one into another. This way, when they are alternated, they produce a straight thrust flow. But when you kind of put all their shorter ends together, they can angle the thrust around a 90-degree corner. In detail, in posing, in still, as a figure, I think it's very neat. In animation, though, it's another thing that might kind of blur together. Speaking of another small jet-like detail, I really do enjoy the red markings kind of all over the design. They very much evoke a classic like F4 Phantom, intake warnings and mid-body turbine indicator kind of line work. As a final neat detail, I do kind of like something that a lot of people have noted and honestly tried to fix, and it's the kind of funky leg designs. For just a moment, I want to bring up something else. When Yasuhiko Yoshikazu did the iconic Gundam character designs, you may note that a lot of them had something kind of weird going on. Like specifically, if you look at how their waist goes down through their legs, there's kind of an odd effect. It's a slim waist, and then the line of the legs does this kind of weird thing here. Now, fun fact, internally, your bones kind of sort of do this. Your femurs don't actually directly straightly connect to the top of your knee. There's an ever so slight angle. So what Yaz was doing was basically kind of accentuating this feature. In his designs, at times, it almost looks like they have like ostrich legs. But the benefit is it makes the character's upper body seem very forward and more prominent. There's actually a name for this kind of in-character design. Because 0079 was so popular and influential, it was known as Yaz waist in Japanese. Now, why do I bring this up? Well, because let me put a classic OG Amuro design here, and let me put the Gundam G Quas here. Now, I don't know about you. Maybe I'm just imagining things and reading into details too much in the mechanical design, but it does seem like we've got the same thing going on. Knowing that for a lot of the people working on this project, either directly or pretty much just directly growing up and entering into the anime industry from Gundam, from the anime Shinseki Sengen, it was clearly very, very, very much a big part of their youth, which is why, by their own hands, they would one day become the creators of the new Gospel of Revelation, Evangelion. So, I think this project is going to involve a lot of very old, dedicated nerds busting out some kind of a long list of things they probably wanted to do since they were very young, and also nerds, in a story. Characters, or mecha, or setting, all relating to that. Well, that is pretty much this one wrapped up. I hope you have a good holiday season, or had a good holiday season. 2025 is basically here. And with the coming year, I was thinking it was time to chip away at some more Gundam. Of course, that won't be all this year has. There are heaps of other amazing non-Gundam shows that I also want to still do. But man, there's so much Gundam, like so much quality Gundam that I still want to make reviews on. I still need to do a lot of the 90s OVAs after all. Those followed pretty quickly after, Char's Counterattack, and not to mention Wing and G and X. There's a lot of nostalgia for me there. Christmas, after all, is Endless Waltz season. But then again, Christmas is also War in the Pocket. And oh boy, Stardust Memory. That one hooked me in pretty hard. And even the 08MS team, that was basically the first series... Wait. What is that? Do you hear that? What is that? Is it an alarm? Or it's getting louder. Where is that coming from? Oh, wait. Oh, no. Oh, right. I almost forgot.